Here we're up to the words kavsa. Kavsa comes from the word lechabot. In Eretz Yisrael, lechabot is to extinguish. So, right, they use it for everything. Turning off your motor or stopping the meter. Everything is lechabot is to extinguish. So, and it happens to be one of the 39 malachas is kiboy. Kiboy is to either, right, when someone has a fire going and you turn off the fire, right, if you blow out a fire, that's called kiboy. So that's one of the 39 malachas, and its counterpart malacha is to light a candle. That's to make a fire. So to make a fire is also hadlaka. To make a fire is also one of the 39 malachas. So based on that, he wants to say that kavsa on Chanukah. Let's say you're a Chanukah menorah, you light it, and then it goes out. And it goes out. You want to know, did you get your mitzvah? Which means, whatever the reason is, maybe someone opened up a screen and the air came in, or your little baby blew. Trying to see. They always find these great tricks. See that they could blow the ball out. Think it's a birthday cake. So let's say you light it and then it goes out. Did you get your mitzvah? Which means, of course, it's good to relight it. Ideally, you should relight it. But the question is, do you have to relight it? Or if let's say you didn't get a chance, were you yotze your mitzvah if it went out and you did not relight it?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it also depend really on how long they were lit before they actually went out?
Yes. So that's a very good question, and therefore we're going to say that it went out right away after 3-4 minutes. After 3-4 minutes, or even 30 seconds, even 10 seconds. It was lit for 10 seconds. The Gemara is bringing down that Reb Huna says, kavsa, if they went out, his words are zokuk law. Zokuk means you are obligated to it. You have a bond. You're bound to go relight it. Kavsa zokuk law. So Reb Huna says, since you're obligated to relight it, you're bound to it. That's what he says, the bottom line. Kavsa zokuk law. So if you're bound to relight it, so therefore we don't want you using these types of wicks and oils because we're scared that it might be very inferior wicks. What right? You know what happens with inferior wicks and oils? They go out like they light a little bit. You come back a few minutes, they're out. So the Chachamim said. Therefore, the Chachamim said you have to get the best oils and wicks, or not the best, but you can't get these inferior types that we read in Bama Madlikim every Friday night. You can't use cholsa and challah, all those types of wicks and oils, because we're scared it might go out. Now, the question here is, what's the problem? So what? So let it go out. So I'll relight it. Why is that? So what? If it'll go out, so I can relight it. As long as I keep on top of it, right? As long as it's, I can relight it. Could get that half hour, let's say. What's the problem? So Rashi seems to be bothered by this problem. Let's see Rashi, 5 lines from the bottom. Kavsa ner Chanukah. If the ner Chanukah went out, so Rashi says zokukla, you are obligated and bound to it. Lisakna, you have to fix it and relight it. Hilkach. Rashi therefore sarech lechatchila lasos yofeh. Therefore, lechatchila, in the first place, you should make sure that it's lit well with good wicks. Lases yafe, make it beautiful. Dilma pasha v'le misakin. Rashi says we're scared. The Chachamim were scared that if we let you use inferior wicks, and we'll say, oh, if it goes out, then you should just relight it. Right? The Chachamim left you up to do however you would mind the lights and watch them, and if they went out, you would relight them. They were scared. Dilma pasha, he might be a pesheya. He might be negligent. It would be negligent. He'll forget. He'll push it off. Right. One of the biggest yetzaharas that some people have is that they, let's say, they eat a big meal, and then the yetzahara says you could bench in a few minutes. First, make one phone call. Right. It's a very interesting yetzahara. I mean, I have it sometimes. He tells me, he says, he doesn't, I don't mind if you bench, the Yetzirah says. You could bench, please, you could take a bench chair, you could wash my machoinim, you could bench with all the kavanah in the world. But first make the phone call. There's something that you can bench anyway. What's the difference if you bench right now or in a few minutes? The Yetzirah says, but it's not the right time, it doesn't feel right. There's a certain type of evil inclination that says, first do a few things, and then you'll bench in a few minutes. Everyone has different Yetzer Haras, but this is one Yetzer Hara. So what's the shot in that Yetzer Hara? What's the meaning? Because he's telling you, make one phone call, and then things happen. Someone needs help, and then your wife calls you, and then before you know it, it's already 2 hours later, and then you start thinking back, maybe I'm hungry, and then it loses the benching. So therefore, the Yetzer Hara tries to get a person to push off a mitzvah, and then, right, that's what we say, mitzvah abal yodcha al tach mitzana. If your mitzvah comes to your hand, don't push it off, because the Gemara learns out, don't read it mitzvah, but matzah, right? You have to watch the matzahs. Smartim es ha-matzahs. You got to watch the matzahs. They shouldn't become chametz. Al tikvei matzahs, mitzvahs. The mitzvahs, they become leaven. If you ever have a mitzvah, you have to grab it, because or else they run away. Right? If you ever get an opportunity for a mitzvah, someone calls you up, you got to grab it. If you start hesitating, then 2 days later you call back, it's gone. So therefore, Rashi is bringing down this idea that being that the Yetzer Hara, he's able to chop a person and grab a person. So if the Chachamim would have just said you could use any wicks you wanted, we're scared that you might use those wicks, and the plan is that you plan on relighting it if they happen to go out. But Dilma Pasha, the Chachamim were scared that he might things won't go as planned, and there might be some negligence, and he won't end up fixing it.
Can I ask a question? Why does he use the lashon of zakukla as opposed to, let's say, lo yatsa?
But but lo yatsa would refer to
you're performing a mitzvah.
It is true. Lo yatsa it does mean that he has not fulfilled his obligation. But zakukla tells you also, don't give up. Try again. Zakukla means you're bound to it. You're still attached to it. You're obligated, just like you're tied with a string. Go back and light it again.
No, but implied in lo yatsa is that I want to do the mitzvah, so I'll light it again. I mean, it's
So he's telling you could light it again, maybe. The zakukla is saying you're obligated to light it again.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, we have to think about it. Just that's what I'm thinking on the top of my head, that lo yatsa it doesn't tell you to go do it again, to try it again. Lo yatsa says you didn't fulfill your obligation. You might say that maybe you could deduce on your own that you have to do it again.
Okay.
The zakukla says you're obligated to it. It could be interesting. They're both overlapping. Okay, so far that's the aleph, right? Harry, so far, okay. So that's the start, and therefore the Rabbanan said that on Chanukah you have to make sure to use good, high quality wicks and oils, just like on Shabbos. Now, so for Chanukah we understand why, because you might forget to relight it if it was an inferior wick, and then you will lose the mitzvah. What about Shabbos? So the Gemara says on the bottom line that Reb Huna holds two things. He holds kav sosakukla. If it goes out, he has to relight it. He's bound to it. But he holds a second thing also. Mutter l'shtamish l'ira. You are allowed to have benefit from the menorah. You're allowed to read next to the menorah. Now we'll have to see how this plays out in the halacha, in the Mishnah Berurah, if the Mishnah Berurah rules like this. But Reb Huna himself says you're allowed to read. You're allowed to do things by the menorah and count your money, according to Reb Huna. So therefore, based on that, he wants to say that there will be another problem on Shabbos if you light a menorah out of inferior wicks. Because what will happen? It will come out that you're reading a great, not novel, a great sefer, reading a great sefer, and you're enthralled by a great sefer, just all about the Chanukah. You're going into the Gemara, all about Chanukah, and as you're reading, the light starts to flicker, and it's getting weak. So in the olden days, you used to have the wick in the oil, and it was a little bit, the olden days, and it would swim in the oil and feed off, and that's how it produced the flame. So what would people do if it starts to flicker, right? If it starts to flicker, you have to adjust the oil that it should feed. The wick should feed straight into the oil. So the Chachamim said that they were scared. They were scared that a person might unwittingly, as he's reading, so he's in the middle of reading, and then all of a sudden, as it starts to get, he can't see it so good, so he'll just tilt the lamp to get the oil in a better position that the wick should go straight in. And the problem is, as he does that, What happens when he tilts this? What's the problem with tilting the oil into the wick?
Shabbos.
Shabbos. What? Oh, increasing the fire. Excellent. So Steve is saying beautiful. There's two isurim. One of the two of the 39 malachas is you can't light a fire and you can't extinguish a fire. And lighting a fire doesn't only mean taking a match and making a new fire. It also means increasing the fire and the quality of the fire, or decreasing it. So if a person, for example, the prime example is when someone takes a walk. If someone would hold this, let's say this oil with the flame inside it, as you walk, it shakes, and sometimes the wick it flickers. So as it flickers off, so then that's called kiboy. That's called extinguishing the light. As it flickers on, he's doing hadlaka. He's lighting an air on Shabbos, lighting a candle. So therefore, that's why you have to make sure not to put your menorah, shouldn't hang it on the door, because every time the door opens and closes, the wick will float in the oil, out of the oil, flicker on, flicker off. It's a malacha of extinguishing, lighting. That's what the Mishnah Berurah brings down, how this plays out. Hilchos Shabbos into Hilchos Chanukah. Right? Is that right? So the question here is, if you're able to read by your menorah, if you're able to have use from the Chanukah menorah, and you're allowed to read by the light, we're scared that you might come to tilt it without realizing. And if you tilt it, that will be the malacha of extinguishing or relighting it. You'll relight it, and therefore the Chachamim made a fence. The fence was, don't use inferior wicks or oils, and then you won't come to tilt it. Because you're allowed to read it. You're allowed to read by you're allowed to, according to the Reb Huna, you're allowed to have hana and use the light. So when you use the light, but there won't be any chashash, you won't come to tilt it because it will be a pure light. It will be a high quality.
They're at Shabbos Hanukkah.
On Shabbos Chanukah. So the first part that we said was kavsa zakukla that's a weekday. On a weekday, they wanted high quality lights because they were scared that if it will go out, you might not relight it. And if you don't relight it, you just won't get the mitzvah of lighting a Chanukah menorah. On Shabbos Chanukah, they had another suspicion that they were scared that it might go out, and you'll readjust it unwittingly, without even, just unconsciously, just subconsciously, you'll adjust it, and that will be lighting a fire on Shabbos, which is one of the 39 malachas. Therefore, they said your menorah has to have high quality oil and wicks. Okay.
But is that why they said you shouldn't read for the whole of Hanukkah?
So we're going to see. There's different opinions. Some people hold you're allowed to use the menorah. But Reb Huna, we're reading Reb Huna. Reb Huna says you're allowed to.
Right.
So based on the fact that you're allowed to, he's scared that you might come to adjust it to on Shabbos. We're going to see. Right. We're going to turn the and see people might argue on this. So that's what Rashi says. The bottom Rashi. Rashi therefore says, "Umuter l'shtamish la'ira." Rashi says, Reb Huna holds you're allowed to use and benefit from the light. Hilchot b'Shabbos on Shabbos Chanukah, or every Shabbos of the year. Aser shemayata. We're scared shemayata. He might tilt it. He might tilt the flame in the oil and try to get a better flame. Litzorech tashmish, because he's trying to use it. So he needs to use it well. So therefore they were scared. So therefore Rashi is now telling us two things. He's telling us why you can't use inferior wicks or oils on Shabbos Chanukah, but in that we also have derived why every Shabbos we say Bama Madlikin or Bama Madlikin. What's that mean? Bama Madlikin, you can't light. Why can't you use those inferior wicks? So Rashi here is telling us another idea. That's why you can't use them on Shabbos also, because the same reason applies on Shabbos. Because your Shabbos candles are also meant to be used. Shabbos candles are there for our benefit, right? We light Shabbos candles for machlekes in the Gemara. Either it's for shalom bayis. You should be able to see where you're going, right? Gemara says people could trip over chairs or something, so it will be shalom bayis. So therefore the light is given to have peace in the house. It's given to be able to see your food. Oneg Shabbos. It's the second reason why we light the candles. They say a blind person doesn't really get full because he can't see what he's eating. So there's Oneg Shabbos. That's the second reason why we have the candles on Shabbos. The third reason is Kavod Shabbos, to honor the Shabbos, because it's a chashuv. When you have a guest and you make a nice meal, a chasna, you make candles. So here too, Kavod Shabbos. So there are three reasons And according to those reasons, you're allowed to benefit from we are allowed to use the Shabbos candles. They're made for our use, so we should be able to see. So based on that, Ein Madlikin, Bama Ein Madlikin, you're not allowed to use inferior wicks on Shabbos because we're scared you might come to tilt it and light it on Shabbos. And for the same reason, you're not allowed to use a menorah made out of inferior wicks and oils on Shabbos because you also might come to tilt it. So it's the same gezerah on the menorah and on the Shabbos candles for Shabbos. That's Reb Huna in a nutshell. It's a big nutshell. Okay. Now, that's the first part. Let's go a little further. Let's see the bottom line. That's Reb Chizda. Now that was Reb Huna. The bottom line, Reb Chizda argues. Reb Chizda says, Madlikin bahen bechol. He says you're allowed to use inferior wicks on weekday. You're allowed to use inferior wicks. You could pass it down. There's one extra one here. Pass it down to Harry. So, Chaf Aleph Abed Aleph.
There's going to be a test later, Harry.
Harry's chayshish for the Gzeira. If he's going to read by it, so he might come to tilt the light. So Reb Chizda he argues with Reb Huna. Bottom line, Chaf Aleph Abed Aleph. Reb Chizda says no. Madlikin bahen b'chol. You're allowed to use inferior wicks on the weekday of Chanukah. Avaloi b'Shabbos. Bottom line of the Chaf Aleph Amid Aleph, he says on weekday you're allowed to use inferior wicks, but on Shabbos you're not. So the question is, what's the difference? Why should he hold on weekday you're allowed and on Shabbos you're not?
You can relight on weekday.
So on Shabbos, let's start with Shabbos. On Shabbos he holds there's a problem. You might come to tilt it. So therefore he agrees with Reb Huna. He agrees that the problem is you might come to relight it. But on weekday he says you're allowed to use inferior wicks. What's the reason for that? So here he comes to argue on the rule of what happens if your light goes out. Kavsa. He holds Kavsa ein zakuk. If it goes out, you don't have to relight it. You did the mitzvah. You did the mitzvah of lighting Chanukah menorah. Right? Let's say Chas v'Shalom on Shabbos, Friday night, Friday afternoon, your wife lights the candles 18 minutes before Shkia. And then as you go out to shul, or later on, right, like 10 minutes after Shkia, after sunset, they go out. Chas v'Shalom. Do you think you get the mitzvah of Ner Shabbos?
Yes.
Right? Here the case is they went out. You lit them, but they went out. So it seems that you get the mitzvah. You got the mitzvah. You lit the candles. The Chachamim made the mitzvah, right? The mitzvah, one of the 7 mitzvahs to Rabbanan. They said light Shabbos candles. So you lit the Shabbos candles. The reason is for Kavod Shabbos, Einik Shabbos, Shalom Bayis, but you lit it. You got your mitzvah. So Reb Chizda says the same thing as with Chanukah. Chanukah also, you lit it, you got your mitzvah. You went out. That's unfortunate. Well, you won't have so much Persume Nisa. You won't be publicizing the miracle so much. But you got the mitzvah. You did light the menorah. So therefore Reb Chizda says on weekday you could use inferior wicks. Because even if it goes out, and even if you push it off and you say I'm going to relight it in a few minutes, and you forget your Posheya, Yetzirah, he wins out. You don't relight it, but you already got the mitzvah because you lit it. Even for a minute, you got your mitzvah ready.
So the first guy, it's Rav Huna?
Rav Huna, yes.
But he thinks you didn't get the mitzvah.
Right, because he holds that if it goes out, you have to relight it. He says it's not just to light it for a second, it's to light it for a half hour. He says there's a share, like you said before. There's a share of a half hour, the amount of time that people are in the street from when they start from the sunset till the last person in the street comes back. It's a half hour. So he says, what?
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, so therefore that's how he gets the half hour. So Rav Huna says, you need it to be lit for the whole half hour. But Rav Chizda says, no. You don't really need it to be lit for a whole half hour. You need it to be lit during that half hour. You have to light it during that half hour. Yeah.
What's the downside of relighting it?
There's no downside. But the question here is, are you obligated to relight it? Do you have to make sure? Or it's of course great to relight it, and you'll be doing Parsume Nisa. But did you get your mitzvah if you don't relight it? That's the question here. Do you have to? And the nafkamina, the difference will be if the Chachamim should say you can't use inferior wicks because you might forget to relight it. Because if you hold that it's just a nice thing to relight it, like you're bringing up, the Reb Chizda says it's a nice thing to relight it, but you're not obligated by the letter of the law.
No, but you go back. It's not just a nice thing. You go back to Pirsume Nisa.
You're getting presuming Nisa. But if Reb Chizda holds you get your mitzvah as long as you light it during that time, even if it goes out. It's like Shabbos. The light goes out. You got your mitzvah of Ner Shabbos also. So if you hold, you get your mitzvah. You get the mitzvah. So then the Chachamim want to say that you're not allowed to use an inferior wick. Because what's the problem? Even if you use an inferior wick, it might go out. Even if it goes out, but you already got your mitzvah. It's not like you'll be, Rashi said, you'll be pasha, you'll be negligent, and you'll forget to relight it. But you get your mitzvah. You get the mitzvah of Ner Chanukah. You get.
Right, but isn't there a hefsed of the mitzvah Pirsumi Nisa, or we're saying that they're hanuka?
Yeah, so it's really tied in. The mitzvah,
Right.
presuming this is the reason why we light the candles.
Right.
So you really got your mitzvah. You got the mitzvah of lighting candles. If you lit them and they stayed lit for a minute, right? As long as you lit in that time span of after.
So you got both mitzvahs at that point.
It's really one mitzvah. It's one mitzvah that the Chachamim said. The reason why the Chachamim said you should light the menorah is for presuming Nisa.
Right.
But you got that. Now you got to check. You
So
got that mitzvah.
which is the mitzvah?
The mitzvah is to
Or
light the candle. The reason why the Chachamim said to light it is in order to publicize the miracle that it lasted for 8 years.
It's like a cause-effect sort of thing.
It's right. It would be the reason why they said to light it. The
But
reason
it's not
behind
two
it.
separate mitzvahs.
Right. It's not two separate mitzvahs. So therefore, you are not obligated to relight it because you already got the mitzvah. The reason why they did it is maybe so maybe you won't be publicizing the miracle so much, but the that's just the reason behind the mitzvah. The mitzvah itself is just to light it. So you light it. You got your mitzvah. So Reb Chizda says, if that's true, they got your mitzvah. What the Chachamim won't say you can't use inferior wicks because it might go out and you might forget to relight it. So what? You still got your mitzvah already. You already got your mitzvah. It's locked in. Mitzvah is good to go. So therefore, Reb Chizda says you could light during the week with inferior wicks. That's Reb Chizda. Reb Chizda, bottom line, Reb Chizda, Madlikim b'machol, you're allowed to use inferior wicks on weekday. Avaloi b'Shabbos, but not on Shabbos. So the Gemara makes the calculation. The Gemara says, Kosavar, because Reb Chizda holds, Kavsa ein zakukla. If it goes out, you got your mitzvah already. You're ready yotzei. So therefore, there's no problem. You could even use inferior wicks. On the other hand, he holds that you're allowed to benefit from the candles of the menorah. So you might read by it, and we're scared that maybe you might come to tilt it. So on Shabbos, you can't use inferior wicks. On Shabbos is a new gezerah. We're scared he might come to use it. Okay, so that's the second point here. That's the second view of Reb Chizda. And that's, right. Now we're up to the third view. Right, you could guess, right? So far we have Reb Huna. He says you're not allowed to use it for both. Right, Reb Huna was first. Right, you can't use inferior wicks for both. We had Reb Chizda says on Chol, on weekday you're allowed, on Shabbos you're not. And now we have Reb Zera. Amar Reb Zera, top line. Amar Reb Zera, Amar Rav, Amar Rav Masna, Vamri Lam Reb Zera, Amar Rav. Psilos Ushmanim Shamru Chachamim, these wicks and these oils that the Chachamim said that Madlikim B'em Shabbos, you can't use them on Shabbos. Madlikim B'em V'Chanukah, Bein V'Chol, Bein V'Shabbos. Comes along Reb Zera and he says no, you could use inferior wicks on Shabbos. You could use them on weekday. It's not a problem. What's the reason? So for weekday, he says you're allowed to use inferior wicks because he holds.
You can relight.
What?
You can your yaitz already.
Right. What's that called?
Ain't zakah.
Good. Kav Sain Zakukla. Once you light it, you got your mitzvah. You don't have to relight it. And on Shabbos, he says you can also use inferior wicks. Why? Because on Shabbos Chanukah, he says for that menorah you could use inferior wicks because he holds.
You can't use the
Because you're not allowed to use the menorah for your own benefit. You're not allowed to read by the menorah light. You can't count your money. The classic case. Right? We should all have these problems. You should need a good place to count your money. So the Gemara says you're not allowed to count your money by the light of the menorah. Why not? What's the problem of counting your money by the menorah? Right? What's the isser? You're not like taking away any from Hegdish. What's the problem? So in here, the idea Rashi brings up very important. Top line of Rashi in the middle of the line. The also l'shtamish la'ira. Reb Zera says you can't because also l'shtamish la'ira you're not allowed to have benefit from the light. Sheyeh nicker shehu ner mitzvah. Because we need it to be recognizable that the candle for mitzvah. Why do we need it to be recognizable that it's a candle of the mitzvah? So based on the idea of what the reason why we light it is to publicize the miracle. So if you're going to be counting your money by it, or reading a book, so people, the passerbys will say, he's just, he lit a candle because he wants to read the new Gemara that he just learned. He wants to count his money. But they won't realize that that it's really a menorah to commemorate the miracle that it lit for 8 days. So therefore it says, Reb Zeira, also l'shtamish l'oira. You're not allowed to use the candles, and I believe we'll have to see the Mishnah Berurah. I think he holds like this, that therefore you're not allowed to use it because it has to be recognizable, shehu ner mitzvah. Says Rashi, it has to be clear that it's lit for the point of the mitzvah to publicize the miracle. So therefore on Shabbos he says, you're allowed to light with inferior wicks. Because even, what are we scared? We're not scared that you're going to come to tilt it, because you're never going to use it to read by that. You're never going to have any use that it's going to become, let's say, dimly lit, and you try to adjust. You won't adjust it because you're never going to read by it in the first place. What about on weekday? So Reb Zeira Marav says, on weekday, also you're not allowed to use those inferior wicks. So here, what's the reason for that? On that he
You're
says,
not allowed to, or you are allowed to?
Not allowed.
Ein madlika b'Shabbos Shabbos. No, you are allowed. 1 second. Right, you're allowed. Right, you're allowed to light from inferior wicks on Shabbos and weekdays. So Shabbos, there's no cause of adjusting because you're not going to read by it. And on weekday, you're also allowed to use inferior wicks. The reason is because he holds kavsa ein zakukla. That's what Rashi finishes off. And therefore, we're not scared he's going to tilt it, and we're not scared that he's going to forget to relight it because he doesn't have to relight it. Okay, so now we have the 3 views that we're in a nutshell of all these things. Now, let's go a little further, and now let's see a question, trying to prove this big question. So now we have different views. Is kavsa zakukla or kavsa ain't zakukla? If it goes out, do you have to relight it, or do you not have to relight it? So Gemara wants to try to prove, to see if we could solve this issue. So let's look down a little bit down from where there's a dalid, the dalid of the Rambam. The first is a little dalid in the beginning of the line. You see that? You see the little dalid there? It's a little dalid from the Rambam at the beginning of the line, or it's next to Taisus the Eloi Adlik. So next to Taisus the Eloi Adlik, right? You go into the Gemara Legirsa. You go there, and the last word of the line is Raminu. So Gemara says, what's the rule? Is kavsa ein zakukla? Is the rule that you don't have to relight it? Raminu, I'll ask you a contradiction. It says mitzvasa, the mitzvah of ner chanuka is mishetishka chama shetichla regel min hashuk. What is the time of the ner chanuka? Mishetishka chama, from the shkia. Shkia is sunset, whether it means the beginning of sunset, the end of sunset, but that's the time until Tichla Regel Meshuk, which would translate from us, let's say, sunset will be 5:43, let's say now. So let's say, towards the end of Shkia would be, let's say, 20 minutes later. So from 5 o'clock or so, till Tichla Regel Meshuk, till the last people leave the marketplace. Because the whole point of the mirror of the Ner is to publicize the miracle. So as long as people are outside, that's how long the mitzvah is. So the last people in the shuk, the last people who leave the marketplace, the hardest workers, when they leave their work, that's the last minute that you have to get your mitzvah. So Gemara says that means that there's a time of the mitzvah. This, let's say, it takes a half hour from Shkia till the last people leave their work. So the Gemara asks on that, my lav, should I not say from here, the kavsa hadar madlik la? It seems from here that you have to have it lit for that half hour, because it says the time of lighting, it should be lit, right? This is the Gemara's assumption. It says from Shkia till the last people leave their marketplace. As long as people are out. So the Gemara assumes that means it has to be lit for the whole time. So you see from here that kavsa zakukla. So you have to, if it goes out, you have to relight it. That's the question. So the Gemara counters and says no. Gemara says loy. That's not what you should assume from this Gemara. It says a shear. It does say an amount from when the sunset goes down till the last person leaves the shuk. But he says that amount is not telling you how long it should be lit. Rather, it's telling you the ilayadlik madlik. It's telling you that if you didn't light it by that time, that's how long you have to light it. You have a limited amount of time span, and this is l'chatchila, this is the best time to light it in that half hour. But you have to light it in that half hour. You can't light it afterwards, because afterwards there's no one around. We'll have to see nowadays. Nowadays maybe the tichla regel mashuk extended a little bit. Say it extends
To midnight.
Extends already. It depends where you are. Till maybe 11 o'clock, or in New York maybe.
Till Sobe closes. That's the market.
Till Sobe closes. But they're open till 12.
Shameless plug.
Oh, Marquis closes down south.
In New York, they have like the minyan at Shem Shabbos, like 1:45 minyan, like that's the last one. So, you have to see. Actually, Tichla Regel Mashuk has extended. They do say, but the best time, the optimum time, one should for sure try to get is that half hour from when Shkia starts till the half hour. It was locked in at a half hour as the optimum time from the times of the Chazal. That was that half hour. So what the Bryce is saying there, the Bryce is saying that's the time when you should light it. You should light it then. How long does it have to be lit for? So Gemara is saying it could be as long as it lights for. If it goes out after a few minutes, you still got a mitzvah. You lit it in that time span. And therefore, maybe kavsa ain't zakukla. If it goes out, you don't have to relight it. But the Bryce is just telling you when to light it. That's the first answer of that Brysa. And the second answer of the Brysa is lishiyura, is the shear. It's coming to tell you the amount of how much oil you have to put in there. How much oil? That's what the Bryce is telling you. That amount, which is we're saying is a half hour's worth of shkia till the last person leaves the market, is a half hour. So you have to put a half hour's worth of oil in there. But it doesn't have to light for a full half hour. If it goes out, kavsei zakukla. According to both of these answers, you don't have to relight it. But either you have to light it in that time span, or it has to have that amount of oil to start with. Which means if you put it in just 20 minutes of oil's worth, and it goes out after 2 minutes, then you didn't get the mitzvah, because it had to have the fuel for that amount of half hour, that shkia till tichla regel mashuk. So these are the two answers, and the Gemara therefore comes out according to this. It could be really kafsa ein zakukla. Could be you don't have to relight it. We have to see the halacha. Look up how the Mishnah Berurah rules. But it's not etched in stone exactly that we don't see from here that has to light for the full half hour. No, it could be you don't have to light it for the full half hour. If it goes out, it's fine. But you need that. Maybe you need to have now come out. The two terutzim will argue. According to one teretz, you have to say how much oil you have to put into your menorah. A half hour's worth of oil. Doesn't have to light for the full half hour, but it has to be at least the potential. According to other teretz, that's the time when we say that it has to be lit. You have to light it in that half hour. You have to make a light. Light it, it could go out after that, according to this. So it'll come out an argument between these two terutzim. What will be, right, according to each teretz, it's coming to say a whole different thing. One teretz is coming to say you have to light it only in that half hour.